Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Evan Christoe. He's the VP of Information Security at R&L Carriers. Welcome, Evan.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
Thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career?
Sure. Didn't always start out in cybersecurity, but I've been doing it now for over 20 years. Primarily in the financial services industry. Recently switched to R&L Carriers 6 months or so ago. So I'm learning a new industry, certainly enjoying it.
Awesome. So I'd imagine over the years you've had some experience in hiring as well?
I have. And, it's changed a lot over time. So hopefully I have something to share.
Absolutely. So I guess more broadly, what do you think? Is the talent gap a real thing in security? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
Well, I think that there are certainly pockets where the talent gap is real. I think that there are people out there with significant skill sets that aren't necessarily finding the roles that fit them. And certainly there are organizations that are having difficulty finding the people that match what they're looking for as well.
Yeah, it's essentially a matching problem. And then I think we have a surplus of candidates with certain skill sets or certain skill levels, especially at the entry level. And I think right now at the executive level. And then, we may have a surplus of jobs in certain areas where there's not enough candidates. So, it makes me wonder, is it possible to reskill, say, a GRC analyst into a DevSecOps role, for instance? Like, it seems like there's a lot of those really highly technical and niche roles where there's just not enough people. But then the more generalist types of positions become more and more rare, especially as automation gets better.
Right. I would say that there is an opportunity to become more technical or to head more towards the GRC side. It really would depend on the individual and their aptitude and their desire to learn new skills and really dig in. Unfortunately, that would have to be on their own time in most cases. And, the desire is really the driving factor.
Yeah. Well, and then too, I think what the hiring managers expect to get when they hire somebody. So, in my experience, and I always say it's like 99% of hiring is just hiring somebody, poaching from a direct competitor that's, somebody that has done that exact same job that they're hiring for and has done it yesterday, not 10 years ago, not 5 years ago, but yesterday. So especially in a candidate heavy market, I think the perception is that, hey, we can be as picky as we want. We're going to get exactly what we want because we're getting 1,000 applicants per job. How can we, I guess, convince on the hiring side people to be a little bit more open-minded and consider transferable skills, not necessarily just that exact perfect band of experience in X, Y, and Z tool at a direct competitor?
Most of the folks that I've talked to are open to exploring alternate experience and alternate skill sets that are transferable. What I would say my experience has been is that screening process, right? And you got to work very closely with your recruiting team to ensure that they're not weeding out candidates that may be a good fit, that may have transferable skills. But some of that comes down to the job description. If the job description is overly specific and the requirements are overly strict, then you're going to weed out a lot of people that might be a good fit for the role.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I always like to look at when you're hiring, the size of the candidate pool, I think is really important. So especially if you have an on-site role and you're not in a major metropolitan area, that pool of candidates can be extremely small, even if it's not a really niche skill set. If it's just a local thing and, maybe there's one specific requirement on there that not a lot of people have, you could have a handful of people in any given geography that fit that role. How do you, I guess, work with your recruiters to assess who's actually out there versus matching the description to what the actual market looks like?
Yeah, I haven't had a whole lot of experience here yet I hope to here in the near future. But in the past, what I've done is worked with the recruiter to review the candidates that they're sending through, gone through line by line and said, this is why I think this is a good fit, or this is why I think maybe this wasn't the strongest candidate. But, historically, I've been very flexible in terms of, my requirements for the role. Like maybe they've used a certain technology, but not a particular tool, right? The idea being that they can pick up some of the particular settings or skills for a particular tool, but if they have the concept from a prior role, then that would apply. And, the other thing I would say is don't discount people within your organization, right? There's always a learning curve around the particular organization and the ins and outs, and that if somebody's already in the organization, has the aptitude, has been doing some of the training and taking certifications on their own time, they often make really good candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it takes so much time to amass that knowledge of a given institution, what the politics look like, what the hierarchy looks like, what the communication styles of certain leaders are like, and
Right.
all of those things. They probably take more time to learn than a given technology. Yet, what you see on job descriptions is exactly that. It's a technology.
Right. Yeah, I agree completely. I'm dealing with it myself, understanding who the key stakeholders are, becoming familiar, getting myself out there and meeting them all. All that takes time, right? And if you're learning that and the skill set, maybe that's a bit too much. But if you already have the skill set and the aptitude, or you already have the inner organizational knowledge and you have the book knowledge, for the skills, then, there might be a balance there that fits.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I guess you're a pretty good example of somebody who switched industries from financial services. So it's good to see people actually doing that. Because when I work with a customer, granted, my experience is colored by the fact that I'm an external recruiter. So, when a hiring manager works with me, they want to get 100 to 150% of what they're looking for, not to make any compromises necessarily, which I get. If you're paying a sizable fee, that makes sense. But yeah, I think broadly the industry, if it does struggle to hire in an environment where we have so many candidates on the market, it has to be because of the expectations. There's just no way around it. Or there's just, to the point about candidate pools, there's just not enough people with certain skill sets, and everybody's fighting over the same few people for these, niche skill sets.
Yeah, I think that is a lot of times the case. I haven't had the luxury in the past of being able to hire certain very niche skill sets, right? I've had to hire more generalists because of the scope of responsibilities of my teams. They've been a little bit smaller. For example, I haven't ever been able to hire someone who's dedicated to red teaming. I've come across some excellent candidates over the years that I would have loved to find a place for, but that wasn't the reality of what the role that I was filling.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and there's so much adaptation sometimes required to transition from a large enterprise to a startup, or vice versa, or large team with a bunch of specialists versus a small team with a bunch of generalists that need to wear many hats. I mean, most of my time in recruiting has been working with startups. It's something that I think I'm cut out for because I worked for a startup and it was really fun. But not everybody is necessarily of that same mindset. I think some people see startups as more, challenging, maybe not as good a work-life balance, maybe not as much stability, which these days I would argue, what company is. But
right.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are people that seem to adapt to certain environments better. There are people that want to build. a program. There are people that want to come in and improve an existing program, but they don't want to go through all the headaches of, well, we don't have that, we can't do that this year, right? They're very good at continuous improvement. Maybe they have a background in Six Sigma or those sorts of disciplines, and they're just more suited for a more mature organization. I've seen that, not just in cybersecurity, but in executives. Maybe there's an executive CEO or president that is real good at getting the company started and getting it up to a certain amount of revenue. And then there's somebody that maybe is better suited for that next phase and getting the company ready for, an IPO or profitability. But it's definitely an interesting thought, right? That there are different people that are suited for different stages in a cybersecurity program.
Yeah, well, there's probably a business textbook out there that outlines the different types of, executives, maybe not, security professionals, but you could say build, refine, maintain, something like that being the three core functions or whatever. But yeah, totally agree. What about retaining people? Like once you have somebody on board, obviously it seems like you're pretty open-minded. How do you keep people on board and keep them happy once they've been there, for a few months?
Well, it's dependent on the person, right? We all have different needs and wants. Some people want, like you mentioned, the stability. They like what they work on. They want to keep working on it. They're not necessarily interested in progressing. There's other folks that want to grow their career. They want to advance within the organization, take on leadership roles. A lot of times it's the opportunity to work on new technologies or be involved in the projects. It's not always so fun to sit and have everything delivered to you without your input. So, people like to be involved. They like to have some say in the way that things are coming to them and the things that they're going to maintain. So I try to get people involved in things they're interested in, things that are going to affect them directly. Also, there's trainings, right? Hopefully you're at an organization that can provide certain training for the resources, or maybe you help them find some less cost or no cost alternatives. Maybe you mentor them, right? Show them what you've done, not necessarily dictating this is the right way, because we all have a different path, but maybe give them different ways to look at things. So it's all about managing the people and understanding what drives them, what their motivators are. It's also how you get better performers, in my opinion.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a big part of what I spend my time on as a recruiter, is assessing motivators, because I believe if you're matching somebody's motivators, yes, in the short term to get them on board, but then continuing to reassess those motivators over time and ensuring if they do change, you're staying on top of it. Because they will inevitably, people have life changes and family changes, and what somebody's reason for coming on board initially was may not match what they're looking for in the next 5 years. But it does seem like there's less and less tenure for employees in 2026 than even 20 years ago. And I think broadly that's because loyalty really isn't there from either side, from the employer or the employee. So I think when people do see some loyalty from the employer or the hiring manager, that goes a long way, just to show that you're actually listening and you care. That's 90% of it almost, if somebody feels heard,
Yeah, for sure. And, I'm usually, I prefer to be transparent. So if someone, really wants to progress and, the opportunity just isn't there, I try to let them know. And, maybe they're willing to put off a move for a few months to see if I can figure something out. Maybe they're not. I've had some very talented folks go on and do other things at other organizations and been very successful, and it was painful to lose them, but in the end, that was what was better for them, and they made that decision, and I support it.
Well, and worst thing you can do is to have somebody leave and it catches everybody by surprise. But I hear that so often. When I worked on the corporate side for an audit firm, that was pretty typical, is nobody would know, and then all of a sudden they were gone, and we had to try and staff or backfill their project work. And that was always challenging. It's like we were always a step behind. But if you can get ahead of that somehow and have that trust and that relationship with your employees, it's not going to catch as much off guard. And obviously, there's some exceptions to the rule. You're not going to catch it 100% of the time.
Yeah. Right. I think a lot of times I would say that I could sense when somebody was starting to not look right. I guess I never knew what, but not even that, but more become less happy in their role, right? The progression wasn't there. The opportunities to work on new projects weren't there. They've kind of gotten pigeonholed into certain roles and responsibilities, and you want to move them, you want to give them exposure to other areas, but the reality is that you couldn't. So you can kind of sense that it's coming, but in a lot of cases, you just don't know, right? The employee is so concerned about what would happen if the organization found out they actually were looking, and concerned about retaliation. I'd like to think I'm above it, but I certainly understand that fear and that concern.
Yeah. Well, I think people can have almost a different view of the company overall and their first line managers too. Like somebody may trust you, but not trust the company, not to retaliate, Right. But if you have that trust as the hiring manager, at least there's a better chance that, you'll get somebody to open up. But I'm also with you there on transparency. It's so huge. Like people need to know why they're not being selected for a promotion, or, if somebody was let go, give them the high level of why that was. If people start filling in the blanks themselves, that's never a good thing, because they'll inevitably go to the worst case scenario.
Right.
I don't know why we're wired that way as humans, but
yeah, I guess I'm no different, right? I always try when it comes review time or time for feedback that there shouldn't be any surprises. That's always the goal, right? Certainly, I've had folks that had a different opinion of how they were performing than I had, but usually they pretty much know where they stand, and I try to provide feedback quickly and let them know where they stand ad hoc before any kind of formal review. So, I just think that helps, right? If people aren't surprised, if they understand where you're coming from, maybe it softens the blow, or maybe it encourages them to do better, right? It just better all around.
Oh, for sure. Well, and that can go back even to the interview process. I don't think it should be a huge surprise to anybody that they weren't selected for a role in the first place. But that's one of the things I see quite often as a recruiter is I'll relay any feedback and I try and sanitize it as best I can from the client to the candidate to try and give them the high level, but something that they can work with. And there's a reason most recruiters don't do it. It's because it can be a liability and you could get yourself in trouble legally. But, where possible, I try and provide some feedback. But often I'll get a look on the candidate's face or via email that'll say, well, that doesn't make any sense. I do have that experience. Or, you knew from the very beginning I didn't have that exact experience. Why did we go down this road? That kind of thing. It's like making sure that the feedback matches the reality of the situation or, what they're expecting. So much I think about unhappy employment situations or interviewing situations comes down to expectations. They're expecting one thing and then something else happens. So if you can stay close to folks and let them know what's going on continuously,
Yeah, I think that's huge, especially in this market. There are so many times a candidate will send the resume, they'll get through the initial interview, they'll meet with someone, and then never hear anything from anybody, right? And that's just not how I would like to be treated. In fact, I had been treated that way, during the job search, and did not appreciate that. Even if it's just to say we've decided that another candidate fits the role better, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not really given me feedback I can work with, but at least it's something as opposed to just not hearing, right? And it just goes back to the golden rule: treat other people as you'd want to be treated to yourself, right?
Absolutely. Well, and even just a one-click rejection in an applicant tracking system, that's enough to where that person, if they're maintaining a spreadsheet, which a lot of people are, of all the roles they're going after, they can just mark that one off the list. And that's something that they're going to remember. Hey, at least they got back to me. And so many companies will do layoffs and not hire, then they'll hire later. It's a small industry, especially in security. Word gets around if people have a bad experience. But yeah, just thinking about how you would want to go through the process. And honestly, I don't understand. Well, I guess I kind of know why it happens, why folks aren't even getting one-click rejections. I think it's generally because internal recruiters will have 20, 30 open jobs at once, and there's just thousands of applications out there, and they just have a hard time parsing through all of the volume. And on the external recruiting side, if they can't make money off of you, they're not going to get back to you. I tried to be the one exception to that rule, but I get why my competitors don't do it. Any thoughts on, like, does it make sense to actually incentivize recruiters to get back to every single person, or is there a way to easily implement that without taking too much time, basically?
Honestly, I that's a tough one. I know lots of companies are moving to AI review of resumes, and it can respond quickly. It's a little impersonal, but at least you get a response, right? Like you said. So I think it's just a factor of, like you said, the volume of candidates for any given role. When I was looking, you'd go, if you were a couple hours late in catching a particular posting, there were already 300 applicants or more, right? And so the volumes are kind of out of control. The candidates aren't always a fit for the roles they're applying for, and I understand not giving that type of response. When you're like, clearly didn't look at the job requirements, you've got none of that background. So in that regard, I understand it. I do think there are recruiters and companies that treated me better during the process, even when I wasn't a fit. And I remember them, and, in the future would be more inclined to work with them than the folks that reached out, got my resume, and disappeared.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Well, I think some of this can be solved through technology. So the latest I've heard, I do think people are way overestimating how much actual automated screening is happening these days. There are a few more advanced ATSs that can do this, matching based on keyword relevance and stuff, but it's not a lot of them. And I don't know how widespread their use actually is. I did hear of a system called Covenant HR. They have this functionality called Scout that will basically, you set a ranking threshold. It'll review the resume based on keywords in the job description and in the resume. And if somebody doesn't match that or meet that relevancy threshold, basically, then they'll be rejected, and they'll get an automated email saying, here's why you were rejected. It's because of X, Y, and Z. And they'll actually get reasoning for it, which to me is an improvement, obviously, from nothing. Right. So I think that's part of the solution potentially. But I think the main solution, and I've been on my soapbox about this for years now, just go outbound and find people. Talk to your recruiters, have them go outbound and find people. Don't have them post the job and then just ignore 90% of the applicants. Have them put together a Boolean string, learn Boolean. There's a ton of YouTube videos on that for free just to learn Boolean, and use a search engine like LinkedIn or LinkedIn Recruiter or You can do it on Indeed or any of these platforms, ZipRecruiter. You can put in Boolean there and go find people that have the right keywords, and then, screen less people, save more time, don't waste other people's time. And it's just far more efficient that way. I don't know why it's not more common, honestly.
Well, I will say my last 3 roles have been because the recruiter reached out to me first. That doesn't mean I wasn't posting to lots of different roles. But the ones where we successfully joined, we met the criteria. I seemed to be the right candidate to them, and vice versa. It's been when the recruiting team reached out to me first. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, right? Go out and actively identify people with the skill sets that meet your criteria. Reach out to them, see if they're still looking, if they're interested. The teams that do that seem to have a higher success rate.
Oh, for
and that's
sure.
Anecdotal. I don't have numbers to back that up, but I have heard that, and that's been my experience.
Well, and in my experience as a recruiter, I can tell you a job description is like maybe half the story of what somebody wants or who somebody wants to hire. There's so many intangibles and biases and stuff like that go into a hiring selection that it's almost impossible. Like, you can't put all of that stuff in a job description or a job ad online. So, if you go out and you're finding people, you can screen for people that have longer tenure in their jobs and aren't switching jobs every 6 months, which is, a common preference that hiring managers have. You can look for people in the financial services industry if you're hiring in financial services, or from a certain size company. And a lot of these things don't make it into the job description, but it's a preference of the hiring manager. It's like, if you want to tick every box and then some, the best way is just to go out and find people, because you can't possibly put everything on a job description anyway. And people are going to shoot their shot no matter what, as you see, if you've ever posted a job. I think that's partially the fault of career coaches and everybody saying, rah, 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 go apply to anything, you're worth it, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, but in reality, with how many applications there are for each open job, if you're not in the top 5%, nobody's going to reach back out to you. So
yeah, it's an excellent exercise in steeling yourself against rejection, right? At times it seems pretty bleak, but as long as you keep at it and keep picking yourself up every time you get knocked down, I think ultimately you will find that role that is the right fit, and you'll be happier. But everything you're saying, totally in agreement.
Yeah, it's funny too, because like it reminds me of that old Chumbawamba song. I get knocked down. But yeah, no, that's important, is to keep a positive mindset for the job seekers, because I see so much anger and frustration and all these things on LinkedIn, and I know it's not helping people, and I'll try and comment and say, hey man, like this isn't helping you. I am trying to help you by saying this, but then they'll view it as an attack somehow. But at the end of the day, people want to hire people that solve problems, not create problems. So,
the thing to keep in your back of your head is that it's not personal. It can't be, with the types of volumes we're talking about. People don't know you, right? That's why networking is so important. Having that network of contacts, right, that know your work, that you meet with. Unfortunately, that takes time outside of work as well, and going to the conferences and meeting people with similar interests, and how did you do it? Oh, well, that's interesting. I might try that. Or at that point, maybe they hear of something, or they know the hiring manager somewhere else that they could put in the good word for you. That never hurts.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I mean, as we talked about, so much volume, you have to stand out in the sea of noise somehow. And the best way to do that is through personal relationships and not looking the same as everybody else. So, a lot of people have very polished resumes now because of AI, but they all kind of look the same too, if you've ever reviewed hundreds or thousands of them at a time. So, Yeah. Ironically, the better technology gets, I think, the more those human communications and connections, the more valuable they become. So that's what I advise all job seekers, whether they're trying to break into the industry or a CISO looking for their next role. I say go to chapter meetings of ISACA, ISC Squared, ISSA, get out there and meet people, do meetups, do conferences. There's so much out there and so many online communities too. I mean, I have 10, 15 Discord channels of all different subsections of the security space, from DFIR to pen testing to GRC, Slack channels. There's so many of these communities, but in order to, I guess, gain entry to a lot of these things, you have to be meeting people online and in person and just expanding your web of influence at all times, essentially. So
yeah, absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. All those are great ways. I try to participate in them as much as I can. We all get busy, and I go through waves of being more or less active in some of those. But yeah, it can't hurt. It can't hurt.
Yeah. Well, visibility is currency in the modern day. Just getting eyeballs on your LinkedIn profile or, in-person events. If people have seen you, you're more likely to get a job. Plus, if you're, the way I put it is basically you need to put yourself in the position to get lucky enough times to where eventually you do get lucky. And on a long enough timeline, you know that you will eventually get lucky. But the question is, how long is that timeline, I guess, for a lot of folks?
Yeah, it does seem to be a lot longer right now. But like you say, it really is who the reviewer ends up being. You get all kinds of advice out there, and really, I may be different than, a peer of mine in what I like to have happen during the recruiting process. Things as silly as thank you messages, right? Some people really get hung up. Oh, you didn't send me a thank you note after the interview, or that sort of thing. And then other managers are like, I'm so busy, I didn't even read it. So it really depends on who the audience is. And if you've met this person before and they know you, that's so much better for you than just being a number or an application through the automated system.
Exactly. You almost have to generate some sort of emotional attachment for the reviewer in whatever way you can. But yeah, it's interesting you mentioned thank you notes. I had a candidate one time, he was interviewing for like a $300,000 job. It was like a managing director role for a DFIR services firm. And he didn't get the job, and the other guy got the job literally because the tiebreaker came down to the other guy sent the thank you note, which was crazy, just because the guy was busy and like he wanted to, but he forgot. And that was the difference. So, you never know what's going to be important to the hiring manager.
or the tiebreaker, right? Yeah. If you've got two identical candidates, right, that's not real life actually, but let's just say, right, any little thing could be that tiebreaker. So, be as polished as you can, follow the process. Yeah, just hope that you line up with the person reviewing for that role.
Well, you could almost think about yourself in your job search kind of like a company or as a brand almost, where you're marketing your brand on LinkedIn, you're selling to hiring managers. And I basically advise folks, like, if you can, even if it's not the way that you're naturally built, which I don't think I'm built this way, but you almost have to view the job search like a sales process, a prospecting exercise, where you're trying to find champions, that the salespeople would use as a term, inside an organization that will vouch for you. And maybe it's the hiring manager, maybe it's somebody that reports to the hiring manager. You've broken into the company somehow. Somebody that currently works there, you talk to them, they really like you, they form that emotional connection with you, and then they can kind of vouch for you to whoever they need to vouch to. And that's how you get employed if you don't know somebody already. But the best thing is to have met the decision maker in person at one of these events or something. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome. So we covered a lot of good ground for job seekers. What do you think on the hiring side that hiring managers could be doing better right now in such a crowded market?
Did we talk about required skills versus preferred skills? I
Not
think
yet, no, but that's
no.
a good
So
one.
yeah, so the more strict you are with your required skills or required experience, the more you're going to limit your candidate pool, right? Maybe like we did talk earlier about maybe you've worked with a particular technology, data loss prevention, for example, but you didn't work with the tool at that organization, but you understand what the goal is, you understand how to create rules and what you're looking for, right? And if you as a hiring manager are saying, oh no, they have to have 5 years of experience with this particular tool, you're cutting out candidates that might be a good fit. Um, the other thing that I would say is be flexible based on your team, right? Hire hire people who have complementary skills, not necessarily overlap. Um, you know, the more different viewpoints, the more different experiences that people have, the lower volume of your visibility gaps. So I think, it's good to say, I have all these preferred skills, right? But this person has A, B, and C, and maybe I don't have B and C on my team today. Or maybe I have somebody that does B and somebody that does C, but I could move them over to something else they're strong in and bring this person in to handle that particular role. Um, you can't always shuffle your team based on who you're hiring. Um, but if you do have that flexibility, I think it gives you a little more of an opportunity to be creative in the candidates that you talk to and ultimately hire.
For sure. Well, and it's like I always say, try and keep the required skills section as small as you possibly can. And then you can make that preferred section as big as you want, really, because it's not hard selecting out people that, maybe meet those couple of basic required skills. They'll see the preferred section and say, oh, well, I have a few of those and I definitely meet the two must haves. So might as well apply, or, more interested in speaking to the recruiter, whatever it may be. But yeah, it's a good point about complementary skills. And I think each individual candidate should be treated as an individual and as a whole too, not just as basically a checklist where you're going down the list. Okay, do they have this? Do they have that? No, 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 no. Yes, yes, yes. But if you look at it like that, you don't consider the totality of their experience and how that experience might play off the individual pieces of each other and off of your existing team. So maybe that person doesn't have one of the 3 required skills, but they have 10 of the preferred skills. It's like, how do you balance that if your current team already has the must-haves,
Yeah, absolutely. Think that's a very good point. We also have the argument about whether you need a degree or whether work experience is sufficient, right? And I understand the arguments for both, and each organization is different. If you have a little more flexibility at your organization, use it. Right? There are people that are out there doing the job and can, really come in and they've been there, they've done that. You're not getting them up to speed. I've also, seen candidates that may have the degree, but they don't have the work experience. And so then, they know what they're supposed to do, but they haven't done it before. So it's an interesting challenge, right? The more rigid you are in what you're looking for, the more difficult it will end up being finding that perfect candidate. And I guess the last thing I would say is, how fast do you need this role? right? How bad is your team hurting while you're recruiting for this? Most of us, I don't hear a lot of managers say, you know what, I've got plenty of people, I got plenty of time. We can take as long as we want to find the unicorn. Most people need somebody in to help with the workload pretty quickly. And the more stringent you are on some of those requirements, the harder it'll be to get that role filled quickly.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one of my favorite economists always says there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs. So if you have your position open for 6 months, what are you not getting accomplished in that time? What's the impact on your existing team? And how do you weigh that against not having, ABC skill on day one? I mean, there's a lot people can learn in 3 or 6 months that your job has been open, So you have to figure out, well, and I think too, quickly adjust if the search is not going well and it is taking too long and your current team is telling you that they're burnt out, then it may be time to reassess what the market actually looks like, what your requirements actually are, and sit down with your recruiting team, say, hey, what are you finding? Like, why aren't we finding this person? Because I find often recruiters will feel like they're just not being listened to. Like they know what's wrong in the search 90% of the time. If they don't, it's because either they're not a very good recruiter or they were not trained at all, or they're not doing research. There's a bunch of reasons for it. But I think generally you can get on top of that stuff pretty quick as long as you make it a point to, talk to the people on the front line, so to speak.
Yeah, I think self-awareness and reflection throughout the process are important. If it's not working, like you say, talk to the recruiter, see what they recommend to adjust. Where can you be flexible? Where, which skill is the one that we're having a hard time meeting? And is that something that could be trained? Is that something that, you ask the candidate, hey, we're going to bring you on, but I want you to learn this within your first 60, 90, 180 days. Again, right? Flexibility, tailoring it to the role, to the candidate, all of those things. I think keeping an open mind is important.
Well, and there's just, I feel like there's so much overlooking of candidates that on paper aren't a good match, but in reality, they could do the job and do it extremely well. And I try and advocate for those folks. Like I'm very specific in my outreach and going out and looking for the perfect, 11 out of 10, working at a direct competitor, same job, all that stuff. But occasionally I'll come across somebody that'll reach out to me or I reached out to and I screen them and I'm like, they're not really a skill set match, but boy, they have a lot of these intangibles. I'm going to vouch for this person. And I've gotten that person hired over the years multiple times. But it takes the right hiring manager, that is open-minded. But I think if you hire the people with the right intangibles, often they'll outperform the people with the right tangibles over the long term or the medium to long term, especially.
Yeah, I've had a lot of success in the past. Maybe taking a candidate that didn't have all the preferred skills, but they had a lot of the intangibles, and man, that willingness to dig in and research and find what's going on and really tinker right in the environment and learn and challenge. Those sorts of things are hard to teach. And if someone's self-motivated to do that and they've worked on out of office hours to build their own network and test things out and, but maybe they don't have the official, background of having done it. I think, people are missing out. I think that if you have the opportunity, right, a lot of the intangibles really do come into play in the longevity and success of a candidate.
Well, and how they build up your team culture and morale too. Somebody who's always positive and has grit when things get really tough, they can uplift everybody, and it's a force multiplier, not just for the individual and you, the hiring manager, but for the whole team. That's really hard to overvalue, I feel like. So
agree. And if they don't have a positive attitude and they're going to fight you at every turn, that's not how it should be done, or that sort of thing, right? Nobody needs that necessarily. I guess that kind of mindset has its uses in specific cases, but really, I'd rather have someone that I enjoy working with. We don't have to be friends, right? We don't have to hang out after work or what have you. But if you're, got the right attitude and willing to put in the effort, then long term, that's usually a better match.
Absolutely. Well, we're actually coming up on time, Evan. So one last question for you. Is there anything we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Gosh, I don't think so. I think there's plenty of conversation around all of it. I always question some of the numbers about the millions of jobs that are not being filled or that. But I do know I've had trouble finding the right candidates in the past. It's taken me a little longer at times to get the roles, but in the end, if I'm flexible and open-minded, I've found people that have done a real good job for me.
Absolutely. It's a great place to end. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do so?
We can try LinkedIn, right? I'm out there on LinkedIn, and it might take me a little while. I'm not in every day, but that's probably the best place.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for your time, Evan. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.